Hi, I'm Andrew Hodgdon with Balance Catamarans. I'm here today with a very good friend of mine. This is Conor Dugan. We have known each other for many years, taught sailing together in college, in our college years. And Conor just returned from a pretty interesting voyage. He was on an all-electric Ocean Vault equipped catamaran. And so I just wanted to do a bit of a debrief. I know it's a lot of people often contact us and ask us about, electric drivetrains. We have had several customers with serious interest in equipping their balance in that way. So I thought it might be interesting to do a debrief with Conor, get the real story behind an Ocean Vault equipped boat, and kind of hear it from some firsthand knowledge. So Conor, introduce yourself and.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So I'm Conor Dugan. I was just part of the Elcano voyage, Jimmy Cornell's voyage on the Outremer 4.0, their model based on this Ocean Vault technology, and using it as a way to sort of test the limits of ocean-going vessels with electric propulsion. I was on board with my partner Taylor, and we were on for the full extent of what the voyage ended up being from start to finish. Ultimately, the voyage ended up back in Le Grand Mont, where we started, in order to do a little bit of retrofitting to make sure that it was fully ready for what the owner decided was, the best option for a combination of the technology available and a little bit of supplementary things like, we'll talk about it in a bit, but things that they're going to add on in order to make the system a little bit more robust. But yeah, so that was a really great experience. It was really interesting to see the technology practically used. As well as to kind of form my own opinions as we got underway.
Well, here, give us a little bit of background on you, just so people know kind of where you're coming from and a sense of your background.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we sailed together in the Cape Fear region on J-boats, J80s. So that's kind of where we cut our teeth.
Our early years.
That's right. And from there, you moved out to the Virgin Islands and was able to help me get my feet on the ground doing the charter industry thing.
Yeah.
So moved into.
Conor he's being a bit humble. He's both a Coast Guard licensed captain and a RYA yacht master.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
So
So,
looking to kind of broaden my scope as far as boats that I could run internationally. My partner and I, Taylor, we ended up moving out of the charter industry. Recently trying to get more into performance catamaran, things with doing some deliveries with Andrew on some balances, things like that. Just really looking to see what the next step is. And when this opportunity came up to be on a boat equipped with Ocean Vault, I was aware of the technology, but something that was very foreign to me at the time, but very exciting. It was a huge opportunity, so went for it.
So that's really the point of this interview. Obviously, we want to focus mostly on the technology and how it works in the real world. So, can you give us? Let's start with a detailed explanation of how the boat was equipped, how it was set up.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sure. So Ocean Vault has these two models that they go with. They have the SD15, which has a gory prop on it, and then they also have the servo prop SD15. So the boat that we were on had one of each, and the idea being the servo prop is better for regeneration and not so good for propulsion, whereas the gory, the opposite. It's better for propulsion, but it's not as efficient in regenerating.
For anyone who's maybe not familiar with the technology, regeneration is when the boat is under sail, sailing at a speed sufficient enough to turn the props and push power back into the lithium battery bank.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And something we were discussing, it seems like it was unique to this boat, but there was actually two separate battery banks. There was a battery bank for each propulsion system. So it was a 48 volt battery bank. That's what the Ocean Vault requires, is a 48 volt system. So we had 24 volt lithium batteries run in series that they would on each side basically be an independent circuit, just meant to power that system as well as provide power to a 12 volt service battery that would power things around for lights and pumps on the boat, as well as all of our navigation instruments.
Okay, good. So there were two separate lithium ion battery banks, two separate 48 volt lithium battery banks, one for each independent for each motor, or could you run each engine off of one battery bank?
You could do that. It wasn't set up to do that under normal circumstances, but there was an emergency. You could actually disconnect the main connection from the battery bank to the motor controller, to the I think it actually first went to the battery management system. So you could override that with actually a physical connection that once you disconnected it and connected the other side, you were only running off of one battery bank at that point. There was no way to run off of both on one system. You had to choose which side you were going to run from.
Sure.
But that was like basically an emergency circuit that was not meant to be used normally.
Like a physical plug it in. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So of these two battery banks, do you know what was the size of these battery banks, the capacity?
Yeah, so total we had 56 kilowatts.
Oh wow.
So we had quite a bit.
Big.
Yeah. So
they were 28 kilowatts each.
Yep, split into 28 kilowatts each side.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, so that's a substantial amount of battery capacity. I think when Ocean Vault when they kind of laid one out for our Balance 442, I think we went with a 30 kilowatt, if I recall correctly, or it might have even been a 28, so essentially half. What was the range based on that battery capacity? Assume you're something close to 100% charge. At what speed, how far could you manageably? Assuming, I don't,
Sure.
Decent conditions.
I'll put it this way: the only time that we had extended motor use was when we were trying to navigate from Sevilla out to down the Guadalquivir River in order to get out to start our passage to Tenerife.
Sure.
I think that's something like 35 to 40 miles, something like that. Current
against or with?
We stopped midway for the tidal change.
Okay.
So we had current helping us. We stopped midway and then had up to 2 knots of current helping us.
Okay. Good.
Okay. So but basically no wind. We weren't really doing any sailing.
Sure.
We left the Guadalquivir with 50% capacity on both banks.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Okay. So
35 miles.
Yeah.
And with some current advantage.
Yeah. And we had the head sail out, so conceivably we had some help from the wind, but
sure. But I'd say it's a safe assumption you could get 60 nautical miles out of it. Maybe 70 if you in ideal conditions.
Exactly. I think conditions, that's the huge variable that we were finding is that even from a production standpoint, if we had following seas, we were producing at maybe 25 to 30% of what we would ballpark of what we would be doing in more favorable conditions.
Okay, yeah, sure. So speak on that. So that's range under power, one side of the equation, and then production of power, the other side of the equation. What was the performance projections on reproduction of power, and what were the real world?
Yeah, they were saying something like we could expect something in the 2 kilowatt range if we were doing like 8 knots. If our boat speed was 8 knots.
And am I correct in that when you were testing the boat out of Le Grand Mont, it was showing those kind of numbers?
It was showing, there was even a point, and I think we'll talk on this a little bit more, but getting that data was a little bit difficult. It would do this 1 second update where as the boat was sailing, we would get a readout at the display where it would show you what the output was. So, we were seeing 6.5 kilowatts, but that's for a flash.
Okay.
Down a wave, that's
on
not
both
consistent.
props.
Only the servo prop.
Only
this
the
is
servo prop. Wow, okay, that's impressive. But
Yeah. So, but it would be really effective, if offering design notes, it would be really helpful to have somewhere in the system a readout that could show me like a 24-hour average production of what the system actually produced for 24 hours and what my consumption was for those 24 hours.
Sure, okay.
Would be really helpful.
Like a data log.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, otherwise it's basically the readout right now is equivalent to like an iPhone. As you see a percentage, you can go one step further and see the state of charge of each individual battery within the bank. But even still, that doesn't really...
Well, so like with a Victron controller, you can see discharge and you can see recharge, and then you get a net number as well.
Yeah,
so you
can see load, you can see what kind of draw you have on it, but again, it's not, it's not a it's just it's a number in time.
It's
it
a flash in
doesn't give
time.
you it
Yeah.
doesn't give you
Right.
really an idea of, okay, practically you can take an estimate, but what we were finding, we were obviously adjusting our behavior as the trip got further along, how to be more conservative. But if we could have had real practical information about how the system was performing, I think we could have made better decisions all the way around.
Sure.
So it would have been really helpful.
So you saw a spike of 6 kW on regeneration during testing.
Sure, yeah.
But what was, so during the testing period, what was kind of the average? Like what real power were you putting back into the battery bank?
So I would say we were somewhere within the 2 kilowatt range. I would say that was a fair assessment of what they said we would do, and we were feeling as if we were right in that ballpark.
Okay, good.
So
So take that, so essentially ideal conditions, flat water, good wind, the boat sailing quite well, and transfer that to a comparison to the offshore conditions.
sure. So then, for instance, we had an overnight where it was, wind was in the 30s, seas were off our starboard stern quarter and kind of like disrupting the flow over the props, which, it just created inefficiency.
Getting cavitation,
Exactly.
changes in I guess, I want to say RPM, but maybe that's not the right term.
Well, so it really depends on the angle of pitch. So that's a big thing that when they were testing, when Ocean Volt was coming on board early on, there were a lot of test runs to get the perfect angle of pitch where it was being the most efficient at regenerating that it could be. So what starts to happen is as the boat accelerates or decelerates or the sea state changes, it will go through this sort of testing, I'm trying to think of how best to say this. It would use variable pitches, take a quick ping of what its production was at each pitch,
Sure.
and it would make a decision then, okay, this pitch is what will be the most productive.
Yeah, sure.
With following seas, that is constantly getting disrupted, so it's constantly reevaluating.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so not only is it being less productive if it were just to kind of be locked in one pitch, it's also expending energy to refine that happy
Sure.
pitch. So we were finding that it was being extremely unproductive for that.
So potentially even a power draw rather than
Exactly.
a net negative.
Potentially, I wouldn't say that that's what we saw. I would say
Okay.
we were net positive, but there's a huge draw. That's still a huge amount of draw that's
Yeah.
going.
So yeah, I mean, I guess it's trying to find a rhythm. It can't find that rhythm, and therefore it can't charge efficiently.
So now that's only with the servo prop.
Okay.
The Gory
Okay.
has this override option. So
Sure.
as a way that you can say, these are the conditions I'm in, you can use the throttle to set the RPM, as you said,
Oh, interesting.
to whatever is the most productive, or
Oh,
what
wow.
you then make a decision as being the most productive. As you watch, it's giving you a readout of kilowatt production, and again, every second it's updating, and it's kind of varying as things are changing, but you don't currently have a user-friendly way of doing that on the servo prop. There's a way to do it, it was explained, but it requires you got to get in there and really like change around the configuration of.
So kind of a little constructive criticism would be to have that same capability on the servo prop, especially considering the servo prop is supposed to be the main
Exactly.
regeneration producer.
Yeah, that would be
Okay.
extremely helpful, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
We hit ideal conditions. We saw ideal conditions when we left Tenerife, sailing back to La Grande Motte. We had flat water. There was a low pressure system that just passed by Tenerife. So we had these unheard of southwesterly winds bringing us right back up to the Med.
Sure.
And it was flat water, and we were keeping the boat at 97% state of charge on both batteries. So we would get it to 95% and it would stop regeneration.
Flow charge.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but then solar would get us up to 96, 97%.
Nice.
So we were sitting really ideal. And if I could say that if you were going offshore and you could encounter those conditions every day, the system is perfect. Everyone should go out and get one. But I think realistically, you're not going to encounter those situations.
No,
You're not going to encounter those conditions.
When you're world cruising, it's inevitable that you're going to see a wide range of conditions, and even with weather routing and you know, detailed planning, you're going to encounter less than ideal conditions.
Absolutely.
More often than not, I would say.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, we've both got a lot of sea miles under the keel, and it's a rare, glorious day that you have perfect conditions that are just screaming along.
Right.
So, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Tell me some aspects of the system that you really liked, that you thought were done really well. Granted, we're keeping in mind that this boat was set up with probably, I would say, the most advanced configuration that Ocean Vault is currently working with. So not every boat is going to be set up this way, but you know, with that in mind.
Yeah, so I would say the circuit is extremely easy to understand. Once it's, you know, we had the Ocean Vault techs kind of coming on and doing a walkthrough with us. The system, you know, on the whole is very simple. You know, it's very easy to follow. The BMS system, the battery management system,
Sure.
it's sort of the central hub of the whole, it's the heart of it. And it's very easy to wrap your head around how the system's working. But if you're having an issue, there's not a lot that you can do hands-on. It requires basically sending that information. You have to hook into some module within the system and send that to Finland, to Ocean Vault headquarters, for them to analyze and then give you feedback about what you can do.
So you need communication.
You need communication to be able to use it. But that said, I mean, for, you know, day-to-day use, I was pretty happy with what it was producing as far as energy is concerned. Obviously, our expectations shifted once we saw real world output and things like that. I just think, you know, it's definitely not designed for you to go off on your own and be able to work on the system at any given moment without
No, of course
reaching out
not.
to
I mean,
somebody.
I think that's, you know, as we get more technologically advanced, these things become more difficult to work on, and you have the so-called, you know, black boxes, which are proprietary, and they're not, you know, you're going to need some service tech to give you real answers. But
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit about the trip itself, right? So you say you started managing your expectations. I know there were points where you were becalmed, so you're relying on solar power. The boat had 1,300 kW.
1.3 kilowatt. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, 1,300 watts. Excuse me. That'd be a lot.
Yeah. That'd be pretty good.
1,300 watts.
We would
of
still be
solar,
out there if we had that.
which, you know, for a boat of that size is decent, but obviously probably could have used a bit more, I would imagine.
We could have added more solar, definitely. I think, you know, 1.3 kilowatts is, I would even say, a little bit on the low end for what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we could have had more solar, and there was space to add a bit more solar, or even just get a little creative with the layout of it. I think we could have really expanded that to at least 2 kilowatts, probably more. So that would have been extremely helpful. Yeah.
Well, so tell me a little bit about, I mean, we talked earlier about you would get becalmed, so you're obviously, the boat was equipped with an induction cooktop.
Yeah.
It had obviously autopilot, chart plotters. What else was running on the AC circuit? A water heater,
Outlets.
Sure. So charging computers and devices, and then obviously communications as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so this is all running off of, we started being thoughtful about energy consumption. When we first left from La Grande Motte, heading to Sevilla, we had it set in our minds, okay, let's be really good about our energy consumption and see how we do. And yeah, we sailed into a high and were becalmed for 2 or 3 days. And then we were basically in, you know, we're down below 20% on each battery bank.
Did you do any motoring during that time? Were you under
a little bit, yeah, we did.
Okay.
Once we were in the high, we ended up motoring as a way of trying to get out of the high,
Sure,
which,
of course.
you know, just try to get out from under it. But yeah, so we ended up getting to a point, actually even below 20%, where we took off the entire load off of each battery bank, except for, essentially the entire load. It's a 48 volt circuit
correct.
that goes to a DC to DC converter that steps it down to 12 volt, and that runs to a service battery, which is our house battery for things like lights and things like our navigation instruments. We actually reverted to interrupting that flow and just discharging the service battery until it got to about maybe 50%, and then reconnecting
And what systems
it.
were you running at that time?
Navigation,
Okay.
pumps for the heads, as you know, as little as we could use them,
Yeah.
and that's it. I mean, water pump for drinking water.
Sure.
And doing. We were eating out of cans. We weren't using no inverter to power the 220 circuit. That was
Okay.
totally unused
Not using the cooking surfaces
at all.
and
Yeah.
Not
outlets.
using the water heater.
Not using water heater. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really bare bones. Just
Spartan.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So that was early on in the trip. Later on in the trip, how did those lifestyle changes affect? You were becalmed later on, I would imagine.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah.
So having learned from that lesson, now that was a good reality check. We also had 2 additional crew. The crew was 4. It was the plan.
Correct.
And then we had the engineer and his partner. They came on board
For this first
for the
leg.
first leg.
Yeah.
Exactly. Help us out with the system, and also just bounce ideas off of him of what we could do to improve it. All that. Very hands-on. It was good. But that's another essentially like 33% of draw on the system. 2 more people.
Sure.
That's a huge addition.
More running of pumps, more flushing of toilets, more everything.
Right.
So
We noticed when they disembarked, and it was the 4 of us, we noticed that gave us a little bit of breathing room, but we still had learned that lesson of you need to be extremely thoughtful about the energy cost of every decision on the boat.
Sure, absolutely.
So things like, before we would get underway, I remember from Sevilla, Taylor prepared a dinner that would last for 3 nights, so that we wouldn't have to cook for those 3 nights.
Yeah, okay.
Things that, this was about pushing the limits of the system, right? This is not, I don't think anyone went into this with the expectation that this was going to be normal cruising. This was meant to sort of see what the limits are of the system.
Yeah, where are we at with this technology at this point? Potentially possible to do this, but
I think it's definitely possible.
Yeah. So you're going to have a limited range, which everybody I think understands. Anyone who's familiar with the technology understands that. At this point with battery technology, because that's the limiting factor, is the storage density of these batteries. You're going to have a limited range at a limited speed, but running all the house systems off of the batteries as well is what requires some major lifestyle shifts. I mean, it's possible to get away with using these systems, but not operating the boat as most yachts are operated in. At least, so my clients, they generally want air conditioning. They want washer dryers. They want to be able to have hot water on demand. And I gather it's not going to be possible to use your yacht in that way with this system. At least not, I mean, for short periods of time, yes,
Right.
but not for long offshore passage making.
No, I think, as you said, it's important to note that, this was done without any systems at all. I mean, this was done 500 years ago on wind alone.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So possible, absolutely. I think it's
Well, the whole idea was to kind of emulate Magellan's route around the world.
Sure.
Without using petroleum products.
Exactly. That was the idea
Right, so.
at its core. So,
I guess I should say burning petroleum products.
Right, yeah.
Obviously the boat's made out of.
Right, exactly.
0
Zero carbon dioxide emissions.
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
So,
But as you said, this boat definitely required major behavior changes in order for it to be an asset instead of a liability, and for this to be something that was helping us rather than becoming overly reliant on it and then having it taken away and feeling lost.
where do you see it going in the future?
So I think I feel like we're in this middle ground between the technology's developing. I think for the people who feel like this is the future, as I feel, and I think you feel the same way, like this is the direction that the industry will go.
Absolutely. Eventually.
Yeah. I feel like right now is this really exciting time where if you believe in the technology and you believe in it being the future, that's who should get involved in this technology. understanding that
There have to be first adopters.
there have to be first adopters. There have to be people who are willing to grow with the technology. The more people that get involved, the more research and technology will go into the development of it.
So on that note, having said that the battery banks being the limiting factor, I don't know if I understand the electrical implications well enough to know, but I'm assuming with this, propulsion system, you could eventually, if battery technology advances, you could essentially swap out to newer batteries 5 or 10 years down the road and modernize something that you purchased today.
I would think, unless there was, as you say, I'm basically a layman as it comes to, this developing this technology, but as long as you could, if they decided to make 48 volt the standard for...
Well, we're moving, even with some of our systems at Balance, not electric propulsion, but, integral charging systems, that's a 48 volt system. So we're going with 48 volt house battery banks, which actually in that regard, you could potentially purchase one of those, and down the line you're already rigged up for 48 volt if you want to swap over to electric propulsion at some point. So I guess it could go both ways in that regard.
I think right now is kind of like this hybrid stage where fully adopting totally electric would be, you could do it, absolutely. As we said, it's totally possible to do. It would be, you should be very aware of the decision that you're making, that you are undertaking this with very little of the pleasantries of cruising. You're going to have to forego hot water,
a more
hot meals.
Spartan existence, potentially. Well, not always.
Not always.
But oftentimes you're going to be having to give precedence to the propulsion system over house system.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, Conor, for sitting down with us. I think it's a valuable conversation for people who are considering putting this technology in their boat. So we appreciate you chatting to us about it and telling us some hands-on, real-world.
Absolutely.
experience.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time.
So if anybody would like to talk to Conor about this in more detail, I think you can reach out to him. We're going to put his YouTube channel and contact details in the description, and you can reach out to him directly, or obviously if you want to talk about a balance, you can reach out to me. And thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Stay in balance.